How did our grandparents turn almost nothing into meals that still make us proud today? Their smart cooking tricks stretched every scrap, every drop of grease, every handful of flour into food that kept families strong through the hardest times. What would we learn if we cooked with that same resilience again? Saving bacon grease for cooking was one of the smartest and most flavorful tricks our grandparents ever used. Every breakfast began with a skillet of sizzling bacon, and when the strips were done, that liquid gold was poured into a tin can or glass jar kept near the stove. They didn't see grease as waste. It was treasure. When butter was expensive or scarce, bacon drippings gave vegetables a smoky depth and biscuits a rich, salty edge. Fried potatoes tasted better, greens got heartier, and gravy turned silky and unforgettable. Every spoonful stretched meals further, replacing what they couldn't afford with what they already had. The scent of bacon grease heating in a pan was the smell of comfort, of home, of something made with care. Grandparents passed this habit down not just for thrift, but for flavor. It wasn't just about survival. It was about pride in knowing how to make a little go a long way. Turning leftover bread into pudding was the art of transforming scraps into sweetness. Stale loaves, too dry for sandwiches, were never thrown away. Grandparents soaked them in milk and sugar, stirred in eggs, and flavored the mix with a pinch of spice or a few raisins if luck allowed. The oven did the rest, turning humble ingredients into golden comfort. The smell filled small kitchens like a hug made of cinnamon and warmth. Every bite was soft, sweet, and rich with meaning. It was dessert, but it was also proof that nothing went to waste. Bread pudding carried the taste of resourcefulness, of making do and making it delicious. It was a reminder that even when life was lean, joy could still be baked from what others might throw away. Grandparents didn't need luxury to create sweetness. They just needed heart. Making bone broth from scraps was a quiet act of patience and wisdom. Grandparents knew that every leftover bone held more value than it seemed. Chicken carcasses, ham bones, even onion skins and carrot ends, all of it went into the pot. Slowly, over low heat, those scraps transformed into broth rich with flavor and nutrients. The simmering pot filled the home with a deep, savory aroma that promised comfort on the coldest days. This was the base of everything: soups, stews, gravies, or simply a warm cup to soothe tired bodies. Nothing was wasted, not even time, because the waiting was part of the reward. Bone broth taught generations the virtue of slow cooking and the beauty of using every part of what you had. It was more than a meal starter. It was a symbol of endurance, nourishment, and love simmered into every drop. Extending meat with oats or rice was survival disguised as ingenuity. When money was tight and portions small, grandparents found ways to stretch what little they had. A pound of ground beef could feed 6 when mixed with rolled oats, rice, or breadcrumbs. It didn't just bulk up the meal, it gave it heart. The grains soaked up flavor, turning every bite tender and satisfying. Whether it was meatloaf, patties, or stew, the trick turned scarcity into abundance. Families gathered around the table with full plates, none the wiser that the meat had been stretched thin. It was practical magic, the kind that made sure everyone ate and no one went hungry. Those recipes still echo through generations, reminders of thrift turned into tradition. Grandparents didn't just cook, they created comfort out of constraint. Using dandelion greens as salad was nature's gift to those who had little but knew where to look. Grandparents walked into fields or backyards, baskets in hand, gathering the wild greens others ignored. Washed clean and dressed with vinegar or fat drippings, they became a meal full of vitamins and life. The taste was sharp, slightly bitter, but honest, like the times themselves. Dandelions didn't cost a thing, yet they brought nourishment when store shelves were out of reach. This simple act of foraging connected families to the land and reminded them that food could still be found when it couldn't be bought. Dandelion greens were a lesson in humility and resourcefulness, showing that survival wasn't just about endurance. It was about wisdom passed down from the earth itself. Every bite was a reminder that nature provides for those who know how to look. Canning and preserving seasonal produce was how families bottled the taste of summer to survive the long winters. Grandparents spent days peeling peaches, shelling beans, and sterilizing jars in steaming pots. The rhythm of the work was comforting, a ritual of hope and preparation. Each jar of pickles, jam, or tomatoes gleamed like treasure on the shelf, a promise that no season's bounty would ever go to waste. It wasn't about luxury, it was about security. When money ran low, those jars meant food on the table and color in the cold months. The pop of a sealed lid was the sound of success, of foresight, of love stored in glass. Preserving was more than a task. It was a legacy of self-reliance and care that carried families through hunger and hardship alike. Drying fruit in the sun was patience turned into sweetness. Grandparents spread apple slices, peaches, or berries across clean boards or screens, letting the summer sun work slow magic. No electricity, no fancy tools, just nature's heat and a watchful eye. The fruit shrank, darkened, and sweetened, becoming chewy pieces of joy that lasted long after harvest. Stored in jars or cloth bags, they were treats for winter days, packed lunches, or quick bursts of energy during chores. Every bite carried the memory of sunlight and soil, of time and care. Drying fruit was simple but brilliant. It preserved flavor without waste, connecting every generation to the rhythm of the seasons. It was a reminder that time itself could be an ingredient. Saving potato peels for chips or soups was a testament to the truth that nothing went to waste. Grandparents saw potential where others saw trash. The peels, washed and seasoned, were fried into crispy snacks or simmered into broth for thickness and flavor. In a world that valued every scrap, even the humblest parts found purpose. The smell of frying peels filled the kitchen with warmth and pride. It was more than thrift. It was respect for the food that sustained them. Potato peel chips became a crunchy reminder that creativity was often born from necessity. Every handful was a victory against waste and want, proof that even scraps could bring joy when handled with care. Cooking stone soup for community meals was a symbol of unity in hard times. The story came alive in real kitchens, where neighbors each brought what they could: a carrot, a bone, a handful of beans. The pot started nearly empty, but ended overflowing with generosity. The soup itself wasn't the miracle. The people were. Grandparents remembered how hunger shrank when shared, and how flavor deepened when made together. The smell of that shared pot carried laughter, conversation, and kindness. It was food that fed more than the body. It nourished the soul. Stone soup reminded everyone that survival wasn't just individual, it was collective. Every ladleful was proof that when people came together, even scarcity could turn into abundance. Using cornmeal for everything was a Southern genius passed across generations. When flour was scarce, cornmeal became the foundation of daily life. Grandparents mixed it into mush for breakfast, baked it into bread, or used it to coat fish for frying. Each dish carried warmth, grit, and soul. Cornmeal didn't just fill bellies, it told a story of endurance and creativity. A simple grain became endless meals, shaped by the hands that knew how to stretch every bag. The smell of corn cooking meant home, meant stability, meant care. Whether baked, boiled, or fried, it represented the wisdom of those who survived with dignity and flavor. Cornmeal was not just an ingredient, it was survival disguised as comfort, a golden thread woven through generations of resilience. Stretching milk with water or powdered milk was one of the simplest yet smartest ways to make the essentials last. Grandparents knew that when money was tight, every drop mattered. They would mix fresh milk with water to double its quantity or stir powdered milk into warm water for baking, cereal, and coffee. It wasn't about luxury, it was about survival. Children might have noticed the milk looked thinner, but the warmth behind the effort made it taste no less comforting. Powdered milk was stored in tins on pantry shelves, always ready when the fresh supply ran out. Some used it to thicken soups, others for mashed potatoes or gravy. It became a symbol of quiet perseverance, of stretching one thing to become two. Stretching milk meant stretching hope, a reminder that care could always multiply, even when resources could not. And while it may have seemed simple, those small adjustments were acts of love hidden in everyday routine. The milk might not have been creamy, but it carried the same promise, a reminder that with a little effort, no family would ever go without. Making coffee twice was a small act of thrift that said everything about endurance. Grandparents brewed their morning pot strong, saving the used grounds for a second, weaker batch later in the day. It wasn't about taste, it was about ritual, warmth, and respect for what they had. The second pot was thinner, but it still brought people to the table, still smelled like comfort and routine. Nothing was wasted, not even flavor. It was a tradition born of necessity, but carried by love. That reused coffee told a story of discipline and gratitude, proof that a good morning didn't depend on abundance, it depended on ingenuity. Even a reused brew could taste like resilience when shared in good company. The act itself was almost sacred, a daily rhythm of frugality that honored the hard work behind every bean. In those reused grounds lived pride, patience, and the belief that even the smallest pleasures could be made to last. It was a habit that echoed through generations, a reminder that satisfaction didn't come from excess, but from intention. The smell of that second brew carried more than caffeine. It carried the story of endurance, the flavor of simplicity, and the quiet joy of making enough from less. Substituting eggs with vinegar or applesauce showed the brilliance of resourceful kitchens. When eggs were too costly or simply unavailable, grandparents didn't give up on baking. They adapted. A spoonful of vinegar or a dollop of applesauce replaced the binding power of an egg in cakes, breads, or pancakes. The results were soft, moist, and every bit as delicious. These small substitutions taught generations that creativity could fill the gaps that scarcity left behind. Every cake that rose without eggs was a quiet triumph. It wasn't just about making food. It was about refusing to surrender to circumstance. Each substitution was proof that tradition could bend without breaking. In those humble kitchens, resourcefulness became its own kind of art, built from instinct and care. Each spoonful of vinegar or fruit puree whispered the same message: there is always another way. It was the kind of wisdom that turned hardship into invention, and invention into survival. The scent of those bakes filled the home with reassurance, a sweet lesson that flavor didn't depend on what was missing, but on what remained. Those recipes became memories of resilience, showing that love, not luxury, was the real secret ingredient. Rendering lard at home was one of the most practical and flavorful traditions in old kitchens. After butchering, grandparents saved every bit of pork fat, melting it slowly until it turned clear and smooth. Strained and stored in jars, that lard became their butter, their oil, their secret weapon in cooking. It fried chicken to perfection, baked biscuits with tenderness, and gave pie crusts their flaky glory. Nothing was wasted, not even the scraps. The smell of rendering filled the house, strong, earthy, and deeply familiar. For many, it was more than food preparation. It was a lesson in independence. Store-bought butter was a luxury. Lard was the pride of self-reliance. Every jar held not just fat, but family history and wisdom. Grandparents poured it carefully into mason jars, letting it cool to a creamy white before sealing it tight. Some would even hide a jar away for the winter, knowing it could last for months. When frying, that lard hissed and crackled like music, coating every bite with flavor richer than anything store-bought could match. Rendering wasn't glamorous. It was patient, smoky work done with purpose. But it was survival with dignity, proof that skill and care could turn necessity into mastery. Cooking. Hoover stew was what happened when hunger met ingenuity. Named after the Great Depression, it turned canned tomatoes, macaroni, and hot dogs into survival in a bowl. Grandparents mixed what they had, not what they wished for, and made it taste like comfort anyway. It fed whole families from one pot, stretching every dollar further than seemed possible. The sauce was thin but hearty, the flavor rich with improvisation. It was food for hard times, but it never felt hopeless. Hoover stew wasn't just a recipe. It was resilience made edible, proof that love and creativity could fill even the emptiest pantry. The pot bubbled slowly on the stove, each ingredient adding its own story. Children learned early that even scraps could create something good if shared. There was pride in every spoonful served, a quiet satisfaction in knowing nothing was wasted. It was the meal that reminded families they could survive anything, as long as they had a stove, a pot, and each other. Hoover stew wasn't just sustenance, it was solidarity, a warm reminder that community starts at the dinner table. Using oatmeal in baking and meatloaf was another act of genius. Grandparents used it to stretch meals and add nutrition when flour or meat ran low. The oats bound everything together, making meatloaf hearty and cookies chewy. It was a quiet form of thrift that shaped generations of comfort food. Oatmeal took on any flavor, turning from sweet to savory with ease. It was reliable, filling, and humble, the kind of ingredient that never let a family go hungry. Every spoonful of oats stirred into a bowl was an act of care, proof that nourishment could come from the simplest things. Grandparents passed down oatmeal tricks the way others passed down heirlooms. A handful of oats could bulk up stew, thicken soup, or replace breadcrumbs in meatballs. It was a grain that worked hard, stretching small portions into big blessings. Even the smell of it cooking, warm, toasty, honest, felt like a promise that no one would leave the table hungry. Oatmeal was survival wrapped in comfort, the food that filled bellies and hearts alike. Turning old vegetables into pickles gave life to what would have been lost. Grandparents used vinegar, salt, and spice to revive wilted cucumbers, okra, onions, and carrots. The result was crisp, tangy, and bursting with new purpose. Pickling was preservation and art at once, transforming decay into delight. Jars lined the pantry shelves like jewels, bright greens, reds, and golds glowing in glass. Each one carried the flavor of thrift and time. Pickles weren't just condiments. They were memories of seasons saved. Every crunch was a victory against waste, a small taste of hope bottled up for later. The vinegar smell filled the kitchen, sharp but comforting, as if cleansing the air of worry. Families waited weeks for the perfect tang to form, marking the days by flavor and patience. Some added dill, others garlic or peppercorns, each jar a reflection of taste and tradition. Pickling wasn't just about food, it was about faith that tomorrow would come, and with it the chance to open something made with love. Saving every drop of drippings for flavor was the essence of old-fashioned wisdom. Grandparents didn't see grease as waste, they saw it as life. The drippings from roasted meat or fried bacon became the base for gravies, sauces, and soups. A spoonful could transform bland vegetables or dry cornbread into something unforgettable. That tin can of grease by the stove wasn't just habit, it was heritage. The smell when it hit a hot pan meant something good was coming. Every meal carried a hint of yesterday's effort, binding one day's work to the next. It was thrift that tasted like love. Grandparents taught their children that every drop mattered, because each drop carried the labor that earned it. They poured it carefully, knowing that one pan of drippings could season a week's worth of meals. From fried potatoes to greens cooked low and slow, that small jar of grease was the kitchen's secret treasure. It meant warmth when money was thin, flavor when ingredients were few. Every hiss in the skillet was a story of survival, a soft echo of laughter and hands that worked hard but wasted nothing. Reusing water from boiled vegetables, what grandparents called pot liquor, was nourishment in its purest form. The water, rich with vitamins and flavor, was never poured down the drain. It became the base for soups, gravies, or was sipped warm as a tonic. Nothing from the pot was wasted, not even what most would overlook. The greenish liquid might not have looked fancy, but it carried strength and substance. It was health made humble. Drinking pot liquor was like thanking the earth for every gift it gave, even the smallest one. In every sip was gratitude and survival intertwined. That murky broth was liquid proof that simplicity could sustain. It was passed down from generation to generation, a small act of care that carried both nourishment and memory. Some families seasoned it with salt, others with a touch of pepper or vinegar, but the meaning stayed the same. Pot liquor was a celebration of what grew from the ground and what could be saved from it. It taught families that waste was a luxury they could not afford, and gratitude, the richest seasoning of all. Baking with molasses instead of sugar turned scarcity into sweetness. When sugar was scarce or too expensive, grandparents reached for the dark, thick syrup that lingered in the pantry. Its rich flavor added depth to cookies, breads, and cakes, while bringing a touch of iron and strength. Molasses wasn't just a substitute. It was an improvement, earthy and warm. The smell of it baking filled the air like nostalgia itself. It reminded families that even hardship had its own flavor. Each pour was slow, deliberate, a reminder that patience and care could make up for what money could not. Molasses sweetened more than food, it sweetened life. Grandparents used it for everything, from gingerbread to baked beans, its sweetness laced with strength. It stretched farther than sugar, stayed longer on the shelf, and gave recipes a heartier soul. It was the taste of endurance, the kind that didn't fade when times grew hard. Every spoonful was a story of transformation, of making the bitter things beautiful again. The jar of molasses on the counter stood as a quiet monument to resilience, proof that even when the world ran dry, there was still sweetness to be found for those who knew how to look for it. Making corn cob jelly was proof that nothing went to waste in the old days. After eating or cutting off the kernels, grandparents saved the cobs, boiling them down to extract every trace of flavor and color. The liquid, golden or pink depending on the corn, was then mixed with sugar and pectin to form a soft, sweet jelly. Spread over biscuits or cornbread, it tasted like the memory of summer fields. It was a poor man's honey, made from what most people threw away. The process filled the kitchen with a smell both earthy and comforting, reminding families that thrift could still bring sweetness. Each jar shined like a reward for patience and care. Corn cob jelly was more than a spread. It was a symbol of gratitude, of finding beauty in the overlooked, and of turning even scraps into something worth savoring. Every spoonful captured sunlight and soil, the labor of harvest, and the wisdom of making do. It reminded every generation that even the humblest leftovers could bloom into something golden when tended with care. Stretching stew with dumplings or noodles was how grandparents made a single pot feed an entire family. A ladle of dough dropped into bubbling broth created soft, filling dumplings that turned a thin stew into a feast. Sometimes it was noodles instead, rolled out by hand and cut rough, each one shaped with love. It wasn't about following recipes. It was about survival and imagination. Every bite was hearty and warm, proof that hunger could be defeated with flour, water, and care. The dumplings soaked up every drop of flavor, stretching both the meal and the spirit. Families gathered around the pot, watching it bubble like hope rising to the surface. It was the kind of food that soothed the soul, born from empty cupboards but full of heart. Stretching stew meant stretching love, one spoonful at a time. It was proof that hands, not wealth, made abundance possible. The sound of the simmering pot, the laughter that followed the first bite, those were the riches no money could buy. Growing victory gardens was an act of hope planted in hard times. Grandparents turned yards, alleys, and even window boxes into tiny farms, growing beans, greens, and tomatoes to feed their families. It was food grown from grit, hands in soil, sun on faces, and hearts set on survival. These gardens weren't just about saving money. They were about taking control of what life tried to take away. Every sprout that pushed through the dirt was a small rebellion against hunger and fear. Kids learned early how to water, weed, and harvest, knowing that every basket meant another meal. The smell of fresh earth mixed with pride as families filled their tables with what they'd grown. Victory gardens weren't just about crops. They were about courage and care that bloomed in even the toughest seasons. Each row told a story of endurance, and every harvest was a prayer answered through patience. Those gardens were the beating hearts of resilience, green proof that hope could be cultivated by hand. Turning stale cornbread into dressing was one of the simplest miracles of home cooking. Nothing in the kitchen ever went to waste, especially not cornbread. Grandparents crumbled it into bowls, mixing it with broth, onions, and herbs until it came back to life. Baked again, it turned golden and fragrant, soft inside but crisp at the edges. It was often served with Sunday chicken or during holidays, but its roots were born of necessity. The flavor carried memories of yesterday's meal, of hard work, of gratitude. Even the smell rising from the oven felt familiar, like history repeating itself in the best way. Cornbread dressing turned the ordinary into the sacred, teaching every generation that comfort could be found in what others might discard. It was food that remembered, food that endured, food that felt like home. Every pan baked was an act of preservation and care, proof that even leftovers could taste like love when touched by patient hands. The rich aroma of sage, butter, and stock filled the house like a hymn, binding past and present together in every bite. Mixing pancake batter with leftover grains was another quiet act of brilliance. Grandparents saved cooked rice, oatmeal, or cornmeal and folded them into batter, creating thick, hearty pancakes that tasted of ingenuity. The grains gave texture and weight, keeping bellies full long into the day. It was breakfast built from yesterday's dinner, reborn on the griddle with sizzle and steam. The smell of frying batter filled the air, rich and welcoming. Butter or syrup were luxuries, but even plain, those pancakes tasted like resourcefulness. Nothing went unused, not even the smallest bowl of leftovers. Every flip of the spatula was a rhythm of survival and pride. These pancakes told a story of care, that nothing was wasted, and everything had potential when love and hunger met creativity. Families gathered at the table, passing warm cakes stacked high and steaming, grateful that something so simple could feel so abundant. It was proof that sustenance came not from plenty, but from wisdom. Making vinegar from apple scraps was another way grandparents turned waste into worth. Peels and cores were saved after pies or applesauce, soaked with water and sugar, then left to ferment until the liquid turned tart. It was natural alchemy, patience and time transforming scraps into something useful. The vinegar was used to pickle vegetables, clean surfaces, and flavor stews. It smelled sharp but clean, like proof that even rot could be redeemed. Each jar sitting on the counter was a quiet experiment, bubbling with life. Nothing was wasted. Everything had purpose. Making vinegar wasn't just about thrift. It was about respect for the work it took to grow every apple. It was the kind of wisdom that could turn endings into beginnings again. In those jars lived a kind of patience the modern world rarely knows, a reminder that time, if given trust, could turn scraps into strength. Every drop of vinegar carried a story of endurance and renewal. Using powdered eggs and milk in recipes was how families kept baking alive through scarcity. When fresh ingredients disappeared from store shelves, the pantry still offered hope in a tin. Grandparents measured the powder carefully, mixing it with warm water to bring life back to biscuits, cakes, and cornbread. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Those substitutions meant birthdays still had cakes, and mornings still smelled like pancakes. Powdered staples became quiet heroes, standing in when the world felt uncertain. Each spoonful, stirred into batter, was an act of faith that sweetness and comfort would endure. Families learned that texture and taste mattered less than togetherness, that food, even when humble, could still carry joy. It was proof that resourcefulness could overcome scarcity, that love could make do with less. Powdered milk and eggs weren't symbols of lack, they were symbols of endurance, the simple magic that kept family tables warm even through the hardest times. Cooking mock dishes like mock apple pie was a triumph of imagination. When real apples were out of reach, grandparents crushed crackers, flavored them with cinnamon and sugar, and fooled the tongue into tasting fruit. The illusion worked, warm, sweet, and full of nostalgia. It was proof that creativity could outwit hunger. The pie baked golden and fragrant, filling homes with comfort even when resources ran dry. Each slice was a victory, reminding families that flavor was born from spirit, not wealth. Mock dishes weren't just recipes. They were resilience written in crumbs and spice, and they fed more than just hunger. They fed pride. Those makeshift meals carried dignity, turning scarcity into artistry. The first bite always brought wonder, how something so humble could taste like abundance. It was the kind of cleverness that defined a generation, a sweet lesson in making life full even when cupboards were bare. Reheating old coffee into coffee syrup turned leftovers into luxury. Grandparents poured cold, leftover coffee into a pot, boiled it down with sugar, and made a rich syrup that tasted like caramel with a hint of bitterness. It drizzled over pancakes, biscuits, or even bread pudding, transforming the ordinary into indulgence. Nothing was wasted, not even what others might pour away. The dark, glossy syrup was thick with aroma and memory, a reminder that thrift could still be sweet. Coffee syrup carried the taste of perseverance, of making the most out of what remained, and finding joy in the simplest sips. The ritual of stirring the pot, watching it thicken, felt almost ceremonial. Families learned that a touch of sugar and thyme could turn yesterday's dregs into today's delight. It was the flavor of endurance, bittersweet, strong, and lasting, just like the people who made it. Saving ashes and salt to cure meat was a practice born long before refrigeration, but grandparents carried it like sacred knowledge. Meat was rubbed with salt, hung over smoky fires, and sometimes packed with clean wood ash to preserve it through the seasons. The process took patience, care, and instinct. A craft passed down through hands that respected every animal they raised. The cured meat hung in pantries and barns, lasting months without spoiling. It was food security before anyone had a word for it. The smell of smoke and salt meant safety, meant survival. Curing meat was both science and soul, the art of keeping life going through the leanest times. Every strip of smoked meat was a promise, proof that nothing good would go to waste. It was a slow kind of wisdom, the kind that taught reverence for work, for land, and for the miracle of enough. Turning leftover bread into bread pudding was a sweet reward for paying attention. Home economics teachers showed how cubes of stale bread could be whisked with eggs, sugar, milk, and spices to create something warm and comforting. Students realized that nothing in the kitchen had to go to waste if you knew the right trick. This pudding became a lesson in thrift as well as dessert, proving that even the oldest loaf had value. The mixture baked into something golden, soft, and fragrant, filling the classroom with the smell of cinnamon or nutmeg. It was dessert without extravagance, made from scraps and a little imagination. The point was not only flavor, but also resourcefulness, a reminder that clever cooks could turn yesterday's leftovers into today's highlight. Many students remembered the first spoonful as proof that food did not need to be expensive to feel like a treat. That was the lasting charm of bread pudding in the classroom. Jarred pickle juice reuse was Grandma's secret weapon for squeezing every drop of flavor from a pantry staple most people poured down the drain. After the last pickle disappeared, she saved the brine to boil small potatoes or to quick marinate carrots, onions, or even sliced cabbage. The salty tang and faint dill turned plain vegetables into lively sides with almost no effort or expense. Sometimes she splashed the brine into salad dressings or stirred it into deviled egg filling for an unexpected spark that guests could never quite name. Each reuse stretched a single jar through multiple meals, proving that nothing in her kitchen was ever truly finished. Children watched in fascination as leftovers transformed with a simple pour and learned that frugality could taste bright and exciting. That reused brine carried memories of summer gardens and winter suppers alike while teaching everyone that flavor often hides in what others throw away. Something that was really common as a bit of decoration in households back then was a teapot. In a sense, it has lost the same love it had in its golden days where people only used teapots for storing their freshly brewed tea, since microwaves are so incredibly common now. They were common in rural areas as well, which is likely where teapots became part of the cottagecore aesthetic. They were also used to brew tea, as you could steep tea leaves in them and let the hot water really soak in all of the flavors and aroma. Teapots came in different shapes and sizes, and you could always experiment and see which one worked the best for you. Have you ever heard of turning a milk jar into a butter maker? I bet you haven't, because if I'm being totally honest with you, I didn't know either. Yet the process of churning really helps to keep the cream from separating from the fat that you find in the buttermilk. The milk jar, since it's a glass container with an airtight seal, can even help to churn the butter. I'll tell you why. Butter is made when you basically irritate heavy cream and violently shake it until the point that the cream starts to mix together and stick. Then, you take the liquid and separate it, and that is how you get buttermilk. Milk jars end up being the ideal choice for this because they can hold cream really well and also handle the amount of violent churning and shaking you need to really create the butter. The churning is what causes the cream to start turning into butter, and the tight seal really helps you keep the moisture you need to retain the texture. The secret of fluffy biscuits was another cherished teaching moment. Students learned that the way you cut the shortening into the flour decided if the biscuits would rise high and soft or fall flat and heavy. Rolling too much made them tough, while leaving the dough just shaggy gave them a tall lift in the oven. Teachers would gather the class around and show how to press the pastry cutter or two knives together until the flour looked like small pebbles. Then came the gentle fold of milk and kneading only once or twice before cutting. It was a matter of touch, not just following a recipe. The pride of seeing biscuits rise golden in the school ovens left a memory many never forgot. These were not store-bought rolls. They were warm, homemade proof of skill. Biscuits at dinner were not just bread. They were a sign that you had mastered something worth sharing. Oatmeal. Meat patties brought wholesome grains into the supper spotlight when meat was scarce and appetites were large. Grandma blended rolled oats with a modest amount of ground beef onions and herbs, forming patties that held together beautifully once seared on a hot skillet. The oats absorbed savory juices, creating a tender bite that tasted richer than its humble ingredients suggested. Served with brown gravy or nestled into soft rolls, these patties delivered satisfying protein while stretching a single pound of beef to feed a full family. Children often asked for seconds without ever guessing that oats were doing most of the work. For busy parents, the recipe offered a double reward of lower cost and hearty nutrition. In an era when nothing could be wasted, this dish showed how a pantry staple meant for breakfast could carry the main course with quiet brilliance and keep bellies full long after the plates were cleared. Speaking of fridges, how did people preserve things before they came around? Because keeping everything in a prison of ice was not ideal either. See, in those times, people had mason jars with really airtight seals. These became essential for the produce and grocery of the time, which was always vegetables, jam, and jellies. Sometimes families, especially grandmothers, would use them for storing meat, and this symbolized how common canning became after the Great Depression and World War I. Preserving your harvest in a mason jar was about the best and smartest thing you could do for extending its shelf life by a good margin. A fun thing they used to do was water baths and pressure canning in mason jars, which was a big habit amongst gardeners and home chefs. So wax paper really helps keep ice cream soft because it helps stop those nasty little ice crystals from forming thanks to cutting off its exposure to air. Ice cream tends to get icy or hard over the course of its short life thanks to the large ice crystals that take shape over the surface. This makes it feel really grainy, and it almost means you need to bite the ice cream instead of licking it, and that's just not nice for anyone involved. Wax paper stops this problem right in its tracks by cutting off any exposure to the air, which means that the crystals don't really ever get the chance to form in the first place. This way, ice cream also doesn't lose any moisture as the wax paper helps to retain it. If you don't ever store your ice cream properly, that is, without any airtight sealing, it goes through something known as freezer burn. That happens when the surface of your ice cream gets dehydrated and gets exposed to just a bit too much air. Think of it like getting a cold, if your ice cream could even get that. Just a bit of wax paper takes care of all this, and for almost no effort too. Percolator coffee pots were what people used to make their dearly beloved coffee before the age of drip coffee makers in the 20th century. This is how you would make some strong coffee, and it was done by cycling boiling water through grounded coffee. It used a basket and a tube to do those, and they became known for three things: being very straightforward to use and brewing incredibly vibrant and strong coffee. They have been replaced by single-serve Keurig machines and espresso makers because you just get more control over what kind of coffee you want to make with them. But to get that old-fashioned coffee, some households do still enjoy a percolator. Rice filler meatballs were the answer when a single pound of meat had to feed a big table without leaving anyone hungry. Grandma mixed cooked rice into seasoned ground beef, forming tender meatballs that held their shape in a bubbling tomato sauce. The rice absorbed the flavors and released gentle starch that made the sauce silky and thick, while adding volume to every bite. Served over noodles or tucked into crusty bread, these meatballs seemed endless and tasted rich enough to rival expensive versions. Children enjoyed the surprise of soft grains inside, while adults admired how a modest pantry staple transformed a small amount of meat into a feast. The dish became a weeknight favorite because it balanced frugality with comfort and never felt like a compromise. Each bite carried the quiet satisfaction of stretching food wisely and the proud memory of a cook who could make plenty from almost nothing at all. Home economics showed that nature had already designed the perfect cooking vessel, and all it took was a little heat and trust in the process. It was one clever secret everyone was proud to carry home. Making salad dressing from pantry staples was a core skill passed down in nearly every home economics class. Bottled dressing might have been convenient, but teachers insisted that students learn how to whisk oil, vinegar, mustard, and seasoning into something far fresher. The exercise taught ratios, technique, and the importance of balance between fat and acid. A pinch of sugar or herbs could tilt the flavor, and suddenly, a plain bowl of lettuce transformed into something worth eating. Students took pride in creating a creamy vinaigrette or tangy French dressing with their own hands. Families at home quickly noticed when their children dressed salads with something new, something that tasted sharper and brighter than the bottled varieties. It was inexpensive and practical, a lesson that good food did not need to come from a store shelf. Beyond flavor, it showed that independence in the kitchen came from small skills built piece by piece. Students walked away with confidence, knowing they could turn the simplest pantry staples into a polished dish. Home economics elevated salad dressing from an afterthought into a point of pride. Vegetable scrap pickles turned the odds and ends of garden harvests into tangy, crunchy sides that brightened the table all year. Grandma saved cucumber tips, green bean ends, radish tops, and even carrot peels, tucking them into jars with vinegar, water, salt, and a handful of spices. Within a day, the scraps transformed into lively pickles that paired beautifully with sandwiches or hearty stews. This practice meant no part of the harvest went to waste and gave the family a splash of summer flavor during long winters. Children loved sneaking crisp bites straight from the jar, while adults admired the frugality and sparkle they brought to everyday meals. The pickles lasted for weeks in the cool pantry, adding color and tang to plates that might otherwise feel plain. It was a small act of creativity that turned discards into delicacies and reminded everyone that careful hands could make even peelings and stems into something worth savoring. So, storing lettuce in damp cloths follows pretty much the exact same principles we went over while we were discussing how bread can help you get your sugar back. It's all about moisture retention, but this time around it's also got a lot to do with regulating the temperature of the lettuce. This really helps maintain the vegetable, because lettuce usually contains a lot of water, and that makes it easily perishable. Bummer, right? Especially when we use it in so many things, which always prompts you to buy in bulk. But that may not be the right idea, since you end up with wilted and dried lettuce, and no one wants that, right? Putting a damp cloth on it helps keep it humid, which means that the lettuce gets a perpetual source of moisture. This helps to keep the moisture in for long, and the cloth itself helps to absorb moisture coming in from the air and helps buffer the temperature too. You get a consistent humidity this way and some airflow since it is a cloth. All of this works really well by giving lettuce essentially the perfect environment it needs to last longer. Candy dishes would usually always be filled to the brim with wrapped sweets, especially if we are discussing the holiday season. As soon as you had October roll around, people would start preemptively planning their best Halloween ideas and what candies they were going to get to fill up the dishes this year. Many even had really decorative designs to them, like colorful or cut glass and spooky patterning. It was all a part of setting up the vibe of your home back in the day. Going out shopping for new and in-style candy dishes is a thing of the past now. But when people engaged in this activity, it was a bonding event for families. So was emptying those dishes every week, by the way. Two-day mashed potatoes showed that yesterday's dinner could become today's favorite without wasting a single spoonful. After Sunday supper, Grandma saved every bit of mashed potato in a cool crock, then mixed the leftovers with a beaten egg flour and a sprinkle of herbs the next evening. She shaped the mixture into small cakes or croquettes and fried them in a hot skillet until golden and crisp outside while remaining fluffy within. Served with gravy or eaten by hand, these potato cakes were eagerly awaited by children who claimed they tasted even better than the original mash. This tradition turned a common side dish into a highlight of the week and taught everyone that leftovers were opportunities, not burdens. Families embraced the ritual knowing that nothing from the previous meal would go unnoticed or unused. Each bite carried the quiet satisfaction of thrift and the joy of making something delightful from what might otherwise have been forgotten. Cooking corn in the husk was one of those lessons that made students realize the simplest tricks could deliver the best results. Teachers explained that leaving the husks on and tossing ears straight into the oven or onto glowing coals protected the kernels while steaming them inside their natural wrapper. When peeled back, the corn came out smoky, tender, and full of flavor, without butter or seasoning. The aroma of roasted husks filled classrooms and lingered in memories long after. Students learned that the husks kept moisture in, prevented burning, and saved time on cleanup. It was efficient, thrifty, and delicious, all in one. This trick carried well into picnics and backyard barbecues, where a pile of corn roasted in coals felt festive and rustic at once. For many students, it was the first time they realized how cooking could feel like magic, without fancy tools or expensive ingredients. Something you would always find in your grandma's kitchen besides a pressure cooker, a teapot, and freshly baked gingerbread was a cake stand to display all her baked goodies on. These stands in the 90s were the go-to purchase if you wanted to always have your baking on display, especially if you had a flair and sense for style and presentation. Most grandmas definitely did have that and still do, so you can see why this would get so popular. Also, it made getting dessert a lot more accessible since all you had to do was go to the stand and get the already sliced and served cake, pastry, or Danish waiting for you. The decorative appeal went for days, though. You could have these in any kind of color, size, material, and design you wanted. The best part was how the design and function always bounced off of each other. Like if they had the space for 3 to 5 cakes each, they would feature more open designs. If they were made of porcelain or glass, then they would be painted cooler colors, and companies worked with each other to make sure that the designs of their products complemented the other. 3 bean-baked beans brought together whatever legumes lingered in the pantry and turned them into a main dish that felt both hearty and celebratory. Grandma mixed navy beans, kidney beans, and pinto beans with onions, molasses, and a hint of mustard, then baked them slowly until the sauce thickened and the beans soaked up every flavor. The aroma filled the house for hours, promising a dinner that needed no meat to feel complete. Served with cornbread or ladled over rice, it kept the family full on the coldest nights. This dish was easy to scale for potlucks or neighborhood gatherings, making it a favorite for church socials and community suppers. Each spoonful offered warmth, protein, and a touch of sweetness, proving that simple staples could satisfy even the biggest appetites. The recipe endured because it celebrated abundance without extravagance and turned everyday beans into something worthy of the center of the table. I bet you never thought of adding rice to your salt shakers to help keep the salt fresh and make sure it doesn't stick together, but it really does work. See, salt is good at absorbing moisture, but that doesn't mean that neat little property that we've discussed so much throughout this video doesn't come with some serious side effects. Salt ends up clumping together exactly because it's so good at keeping moisture in. And what's good at absorbing moisture from other things? Rice. Rice is amazing at doing this. It can even take it in from the air, so taking away some excess moisture from salt doesn't mean a thing to the tried and tested unit that is rice. As far as grains go, this one really comes in handy in all kinds of ways. Those large chunks of salt are really difficult to break apart any other way, but if you just throw in some rice into your result shaker, you'll find a world of convenience you didn't even know existed, and it was sitting under your nose all along. Making Jello salad hold its shape was a practical challenge in classrooms during the 1960s and 1970s when molded salads filled tables at picnics and church suppers. Teachers explained that fruit had to be folded in only after the gelatin partially set. Otherwise, the pieces would sink or the mixture would collapse. Students stirred gently, careful not to break the wobble that was part of the charm. Cream or whipped topping could be added, but it had to be folded just so to stay fluffy. The whole process taught patience and timing, as well as a bit of presentation. Jello molds seemed simple, yet they were a test of planning and skill. Students who managed to unmold a perfect salad onto a plate felt like they had achieved something worth applause. At home, these salads became colorful highlights on tables filled with casseroles and meatloaf. It was a clever trick to make ordinary gelatin into a dish that drew attention. Vegetable scraps. Soup turned trimmings into treasure by capturing every ounce of flavor from what others might discard. Carrot tops, celery leaves, onion skins, and the tough ends of beans were saved through the week in a chilled pot until a rainy day called for a simmering kettle of broth. Grandma added water, a bay leaf, and perhaps a pinch of salt, letting the vegetables release their hidden sweetness into a fragrant stock. Strained and served with a handful of noodles or grains, this soup tasted far richer than its humble beginnings. The family learned to see every peel and stem as a promise of another meal rather than waste. Friends who dropped by were always surprised that such depth came from what they would have thrown away. This practice taught frugality, patience, and respect for the harvest while keeping the household well-fed through seasons of scarcity and plenty alike. The meat grinders of yesterday were known as manual food mincers, and before electrical appliances and pre-packaged processed meat took over marts and homes alike, they were a kitchen staple you would find everywhere. Manual food mincers let any kind of family enjoy most kinds of food, like meat, veggies, and dry nuts as well. You could have ground meat or minced, which let them make sausages and burgers, steaks, or pâtés. So you could open up access to dumplings for dinner or a cookout with homemade burgers. A lot of meat stuffing dishes like meatloafs and dumplings were also very popular things to make, so food mincers helped in preparing those, and they were very self-sufficient and economical. Chilled bowls are actually fantastic for placing your whipping cream in because the cold temperatures here really help in keeping the fat in the cream stable. Why is the stability of the fat of your whipping cream a subject you may want to be invested in? Well, that's because unlike keeping a stable diet or sleep schedule, the effects this time around are a lot more immediate. Whipping cream is made up of a lot of fat molecules that get suspended in the water. That's what happens when you whip the cream. Those molecules start clumping together and make what you see. At room temperature even, this fat can start to melt, and it means you lose the texture of whipping cream when it's at its best. If you chill the bowl, though, you don't get this problem because the fat actually stays firm and helps the foam keep its shape. Pretty interesting, right? I know I like my whipping cream at tip-top performance, and if you do too, maybe you want to keep this one in mind. Pan drippings gravy ensured that every drop of flavor from a roast found its way to the table instead of the trash. After removing the meat, Grandma deglazed the hot pan with water or stock, scraping up the caramelized bits before whisking in flour for a silky sauce. This golden gravy transformed plain potatoes, biscuits, or rice into a feast and gave the family an extra meal from the same roast. Children waited eagerly to mop up every trace with crusty bread, while adults savored the depth that only those browned drippings could give. The practice honored the belief that nothing in the kitchen should be wasted, and that the best tastes often came from what remained behind. Pan drippings gravy turned an ordinary dinner into a memorable one and stretched Sunday's roast across several nights of comfort. It showed that economy and luxury can share the same spoon when a careful cook refuses to let flavor slip away. Cooking potatoes in their skins was a simple yet important lesson that showed how much nutrition could be saved with one change. Teachers explained that peeling potatoes stripped away vitamins and fiber, while leaving skins on preserved them. Students learned to scrub potatoes well and boil or bake them whole. The result was tender flesh with added flavor from the skins. It also saved time in preparation and cut down on waste. Families at home often knew this trick, but in classrooms it became a formal part of nutrition lessons. Potatoes were a staple on nearly every table, so learning to cook them better made a real difference. Students realized that even small shifts in method improved both health and thrift. The lesson carried forward into mashed potatoes with skins, baked potatoes, or potato salads with more substance. Home economics gave everyday staples a healthier twist without extra cost. It was a reminder that wisdom often came in the simplest forms. Okay, so you don't have any string to slice your cake with, and your knife just isn't sharp enough to make the cut, literally. What do? Would you believe me if I said that soap bars actually help sharpen your knives? While they'll never help do the job as well as a sharpening rod or some kind of whetstone, they can work as a last resort in a tricky situation where you really need just a bit more of an edge. Again, literally. The reason soap bars are so good for this is because of a combination of a few things we've discussed so far in the video and a few things that we haven't. So, basically, soap bars are lubricating, and you all know that. The soap helps cool down the blade by reducing the overall friction, and while you'd think this is counterproductive to sharpening, it really just means that smoother sharpening can happen since the blade doesn't overheat. This helps preserve the overall standard of your steel. So, soap isn't really that abrasive, but it is slightly abrasive, and this helps sharpen the blade just a little bit thanks to the really gritty particles you find in most bars. It also helps clean the knife, obviously, and that can really help restore some of the edge of the blade. While I bet you had no idea any of this was possible, now you know soap bars are officially in your list of things that help keep that knife cutting edge. Okay, I'm sorry, that's the last one. Floral China had a bit of a renaissance in the 20th century, and those crockpots always looked good with it. This was because Victorian design trends started having a big focus on ornate and floral prints, and China manufacturers listened as soon as the trend popped up. They wanted to put out more and more floral designs to attract more of an audience, and they especially wanted to get ahead early in the rat race involving dinnerware sets. These sets started becoming very widespread, and most would come with floral designs, and it was like a whole new market with untapped sales for a lot of producers. As a result, you had every house loaded with matching fine china sets that always looked like a painting, or had every kind of flower you had seen in your life on a different plate. Sweet corn fritters turned leftover kernels from summer suppers into crisp golden cakes that worked for breakfast, lunch, or a quick evening bite. Grandma whisked corn with a simple batter of flour, eggs, and milk, then dropped spoonfuls into a sizzling skillet where they puffed and browned in minutes. The natural sweetness of the corn paired perfectly with a drizzle of honey or a sprinkle of salt depending on the mood of the meal. Served hot, they brought the memory of sunny fields to chilly winter tables and stretched a small amount of produce into something hearty. Farmers loved them for using every ear to the last kernel, while city families enjoyed their easy preparation and cheerful flavor. They were portable enough for lunch pails and fancy enough for church socials, which made them a year-round favorite. A platter of these fritters proved that nothing from the garden ever had to go to waste and that simple ingredients could still feel like a treat. Using leftover ham bones in soup was one of the thrifty lessons that showed how waste could be turned into days of meals. Teachers explained how bones, with bits of meat still clinging, flavored beans, split peas, or lentils into hearty dishes. Students watched as a pot transformed simple, inexpensive ingredients into something rich and filling. It was a lesson in thrift, nutrition, and patience all at once. The aroma of simmering beans flavored by hambone carried a comfort that stayed with students long after class. Families often knew the trick already, but seeing it taught in school reinforced its value. For households with little to spare, nothing was wasted, not even bones. Students realized that flavor did not have to come from expensive cuts, but from knowing how to use what you had. Soups like these warmed homes, filled stomachs, and reminded everyone of resourcefulness. Home economics kept alive the art of stretching food until nothing remained. It was more than cooking, It was survival turned flavorful. Recipe books with tabs was a really practical habit that grandmas retained throughout their tenure as the best cook in the entire family. Back then, you did not have a notes app or the ability to switch between 120 Google Chrome tabs, but you had to keep your favorite recipes in easy access anyway. Recipe books were also something that grandmas in general would make pretty often because they wanted to preserve their best hits and pass them down for their kids, and their absolute favorites would often be marked with colorful tabs. It also helped to keep things organized according to the situation at hand. Sometimes, you needed an appetizer or a side dish quickly, and you didn't have time to flip through the entire book to locate it. In times like those, it was great to have a recipe book with tabs. If even one of these old tricks reminds you of your grandparents' kitchen, tell me which one. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe so we can keep their wisdom cooking.